On the battlefield near Troy, two types of valor clashed, two completely different answers to the question of what makes a man a hero. On the one hand, there was indomitable physical strength embodied in a man. On the other, a fierce impulse reinforced by divine will. These were Ajax the Great and Diomedes, the two pillars on which, after Achilles, the entire Achaean war machine rested. Ajax Telamon, a Salaminian, cousin of Achilles himself, was the embodiment of raw, earthly power. He was a towering warrior, a colossus whose mere presence on the battlefield inspired confidence in his allies and primal fear in his enemies. His main symbol was a huge shield as tall as a man. It was not just protective equipment, but a real engineering structure of its time, bound from 7 layers of the strongest ox hide and edged with shining copper. It was so heavy that an ordinary warrior could hardly lift it, but for Ajax it was a natural extension of his body. This shield was a mobile wall behind which other warriors could take cover, a bastion that he placed where the Trojan onslaught was particularly strong. He did not resort to tricks and tactical ruses. His fighting was as direct as the flight of a spear he threw, and as crushing as the blow of a rock he could lift and hurl at the enemy. Ajax's strength was honest, devoid of grace, but absolutely reliable. When the Greeks faltered and ran, he remained. When it was necessary to cover the retreat and carry away the body of a fallen comrade, he strode towards the enemy spears, taking their blows on his giant shield. Ajax was an unshakable rock against which the waves of the Trojan attack broke. He was the one who stood when everyone else ran. His complete opposite was Diomedes, the young king of Argos. He was a warrior of a different ilk, combining fury with sharp wit and speed with divine protection. Not inferior to Ajax in bravery, Diomedes did not rely solely on his muscles. His strength lay not so much in them as in his spirit, in that divine spark that Athena Pallas ignited in him. He was her favorite, and the goddess of wisdom granted him not only courage, but also the ability to see what was hidden from the eyes of mere mortals. In battle, Diomedes was like a hurricane. He did not stand still or defend himself. He moved, broke through the ranks, sowing chaos and death. His spear, guided by the invisible hand of the goddess, found vulnerable spots in even the thickest armor. But behind this fury lay cold calculation. Diomedes was not only a fighter, but also one of the wisest advisers in the Achaean camp, whose word carried weight even with the supreme king Agamemnon. He was bold, but not reckless, capable of a swift attack and a cunning night sortie. If Ajax was an indestructible siege tower, slowly and surely crushing the enemy, then Diomedes was a flashing lightning bolt, delivering sudden and deadly blows. Two heroes, two pillars of the Achaean army, whose fighting styles and very nature of their valor were so different. As Homer himself wrote, describing the steadfastness of one of them in the thick of battle, so Telamon's son Ajax, the mighty stronghold of the Danaans. To truly appreciate the magnitude of these two figures, one must turn to the most severe test for any Achaean warrior, a duel with Hector, the brilliant son of Priam. It is in the clash with Troy's best warrior that their characters and fighting styles are revealed with utmost clarity. The duel between Ajax and Hector became one of the central events of the Iliad before Achilles' return. It was not a chance encounter in the turmoil of battle, but a formal ritual duel between champions, surrounded by all the epic solemnity. When Hector challenged any of the Achaeans, fear gripped even the bravest. Only after an angry speech by old Nestor did the 9 greatest leaders, including Ajax and Diomedes, come forward. And when Ajax's lot fell from the helmet, a sigh of relief swept through the Achaean camp. They believed in him. They saw in him the only force capable of standing up to Hector on equal terms. The duel itself was a clash of two titanic forces. Ajax, clad in gleaming bronze, advanced on his enemy with a smile on his face, shaking the earth with his footsteps and swinging his enormous spear. With his first blow, he pierced Hector's famous shield, but the Trojan dodged. In response, Hector hurled his spear, which pierced 6 layers of bull hide on Ajax's shield, but was stopped by the 7th and final layer. It was a battle of attrition, where brute force was pitted against brute force. The climax came when the warriors, having broken their spears, grabbed their swords. But even then they were unable to inflict a decisive wound on each other. Then Ajax, true to his nature, resorted to primitive weapons. He picked up a huge black stone from the ground, which 2 ordinary men could hardly have moved, and hurled it at Hector. The blow struck his shield, but its force was such that the Trojan hero fell to the ground, and only the intervention of Apollo saved him. The duel was stopped at nightfall. It ended in a draw, but it was a draw in which Ajax had the moral victory. He did not just survive, he nearly killed the greatest defender of Troy, forcing him to retreat. Their parting was filled with nobility. They exchanged gifts as a sign of mutual respect. Ajax proved that in a direct, honest fight, he was at least equal to Hector. The clashes between Diomedes and Priam's son were completely different. Diomedes never sought a formal duel. His element was the general melee, where his speed and divine fury were most effective. He was a constant, exhausting threat to Hector, a sting that appeared in the most unexpected places. At the height of his Aristeia, when he was sowing panic in the Trojan ranks, Hector rushed at him to stop this bloody hurricane. But Diomedes, even in the heat of battle, did not lose his head. He saw the god of war, Ares, himself next to Hector, and despite all his courage, he wisely retreated, ordering his warriors to go on the defensive. He understood the limits of his abilities, even when those limits were extended by divine will. Later, when Ares left the battlefield, Diomedes rushed at Hector again. He threw his spear, which, guided by the hand of Athena, struck Hector's charioteer, piercing his head. Hector himself was on the verge of death, and only confusion in the ranks allowed him to avoid the fatal blow. In these skirmishes, Diomedes did not dominate as physically as Ajax, but he was more dangerous because of his unpredictability and accuracy. He forced Hector to react, to be distracted, to constantly look back. If Ajax was a wall that Hector could not break through, Diomedes was a blade that constantly sought to find a breach in his armor. But the true nature of their valor is revealed not only in their confrontation with mortal enemies, but also in their attitude towards the immortals. And here the difference between them becomes a gulf. Ajax was a hero of the earth. His strength came from his muscles, his bones, his indomitable spirit. He was pious, as befitted a warrior of that era. He made sacrifices and respected the gods, but never relied on them as the source of his power. In later myths, he is credited with a proud phrase uttered to his father before sailing to Troy. With the help of the gods, even a coward can win. I hope to win glory without them. This phrase, although not from the Iliad, perfectly reflects the essence of his character. His exploits are the pinnacle of human capabilities. When he single-handedly defends the ships, it is not a divine miracle, but a miracle of human endurance and courage. The gods look upon him with respect. Poseidon may encourage him with a word, but they do not imbue him with supernatural power. He stands alone, immense and solitary in his might. Diomedes was a hero born of the union of human courage and divine will. His Aristeia, described in the 5th song of the Iliad, has no parallel in all of world epic poetry. It is not just a day of glory for one warrior. It is a day when the boundaries between the world of mortals and the world of gods were thinned and broken. Athena does not simply inspire him, she becomes his comrade in arms. First, she removes the veil from his eyes, allowing him to see the immortals, with only one order, not to engage in battle with any of them except Aphrodite. Burning with rage, Diomedes rushes across the field, striking down dozens of Trojans. He wounds Aeneas, son of Aphrodite, and when the goddess of love descends to save her son, Diomedes, remembering Athena's command, rushes at her. His bronze spear scratches the goddess's delicate skin, and ichor, the immortal blood of the gods, flows from the wound. Humiliated and weeping, Aphrodite flies away to Olympus to complain to Zeus. But Diomedes does not stop there. Seeing Eris helping the Trojans, he, with the direct permission of Athena, who has appeared to him, directs his chariot straight at the god of war. The goddess herself, invisible to others, stands beside him, takes the reins in her hands, and directs his spear straight into Eris's stomach. The wounded god lets out a cry like the cry of 10,000 warriors, and flees in terror to Olympus. This act is unthinkable. A mortal, albeit a great hero, has wounded 2 Olympians in one day. This deed places Diomedes in a very special category. His bravery borders on audacity, but it is an audacity sanctioned and directed by a higher power. He is a weapon in the hands of the goddess, and on this day he was the most fearsome weapon beneath the walls of Troy. Ajax could have stood against an entire army, but he would never have thought of raising his spear against a god.
Diomedes not only thought of it, but did it, forever inscribing his name in history as a god fighter. This contrast in the patronage of the gods is directly related to their internal structure, their psychology. War is not only a battlefield, but also a council of leaders, night raids, diplomacy. And here, the clever and calculating Diomedes once again shows his superiority over the straightforward Ajax. Diomedes is not just a fighter, he is one of the key speakers at the Achaean assemblies. When Agamemnon, wishing to test the spirit of the army, proposes to end the war and sail home, it is the young Diomedes who is the first to find the courage to object to the supreme king. He delivers a fiery speech accusing Agamemnon of cowardice and declaring that even if everyone else sails away, he and his friend Sthenelus will remain and fight until Troy falls. His words inspire the army and force the ashamed Agamemnon to abandon his plan. The pinnacle of his strategic genius is a night raid on the Trojan camp together with the cunning Odysseus. Odysseus' choice of Diomedes was no accident. He valued not only his bravery, but also his sharp mind and ability to act covertly. Together, they carry out an exemplary diversionary operation. They capture and interrogate the Trojan spy Dolon, and then, using the information they have obtained, infiltrate the camp of the Thracian king Rhesus, an ally of the Trojans. Diomedes mercilessly slaughters the sleeping Thracians, including the king himself, while Odysseus leads away Rhesus' famous white horses, for, according to legend, if these horses drank water from the river Scamander, Troy would be impossible to take. This operation is a perfect example of a combination of strength, cunning, and determination. Ajax, for all his valor, would have been completely incapable of such a thing. His nature demanded open combat, honest face-to-face confrontation. Stealth and espionage were alien to his nature. It was precisely this inner complexity and flexibility that allowed Diomedes to survive the war. He was one of the few great heroes who not only survived, but also returned safely to his homeland. His story after Troy is full of adventures, but he was not broken. Ajax's fate was much more tragic, and his death was a direct consequence of his greatest virtue, which turned into a fatal flaw, his pride. After Achilles' death, the question arose as to who would inherit his divine armor, forged by Hephaestus himself. The two main contenders were Ajax and Odysseus. Ajax based his claim on the right of strength and kinship.
He was the greatest warrior after Achilles. He carried his body from the battlefield, risking his life under a hail of Trojan spears. For his straightforward mind, the choice was obvious. Odysseus, on the other hand, appealed to his intelligence and strategic contribution to the victory. The decision was left to the judgment of the Trojan prisoners, who, of course, awarded the armor to the one who had caused them more harm with his cunning, Odysseus. For Ajax it was a blow he could not bear. His world, based on simple and understandable principles, where valor and strength were the highest values, collapsed. He considered himself disgraced and humiliated. In a fit of rage and madness sent upon him by Athena, Odysseus' patron goddess, he decided to slaughter all the Achaean leaders at night. But the goddess clouded his mind, and instead of Agamemnon and Menelaus' tents, he attacked a flock of sheep, furiously tearing and whipping the unfortunate animals, mistaking them for his offenders. When his mind returned to him in the morning, and he saw what he had done, the shame became unbearable. The greatest defender of the Achaeans, the stronghold of their army, had become a laughingstock. Unable to bear it, Ajax threw himself on his sword, the very one he had received as a gift from Hector after their duel. Thus perished the second strongest warrior of the Achaean army, slain not by an enemy, but by his own unyielding pride. He was too great and too simple for a world of intrigue and eloquence. He was a rock that could not bend, and so when the pressure became unbearable, it split. Comparing their fates, we see a fundamental difference. Diomedes' valor was multifaceted. He was brave in battle, wise in counsel, cunning in sortie. He knew how to adapt, retreat when necessary, and attack fiercely when the opportunity arose. His heroism was intelligent and ultimately viable. Ajax's heroism was monolithic, pure as crystal, and just as fragile. He was the embodiment of one, but colossal virtue, steadfastness. But when the war demanded something else of him, flexibility, the ability to lose, humility, his inner core could not withstand it. Even in the assessments of their comrades, this difference is evident. When it was necessary to withstand the onslaught, all eyes turned to Ajax. He was the guarantee that the front would not collapse. His presence was reassuring. But when it was necessary to find an unconventional solution, to come up with a ruse, to inspire the desperate, Diomedes came to the fore. Old Nestor, the wisest of the Greeks, relied on Ajax as a wall, but listened to Diomedes as the voice of reason and courage. They were not interchangeable. They were two different but equally necessary components of victory. One was the foundation and walls of the Achaean army, the other its battering ram and striking sword. Without Ajax's steadfastness, the Greeks would have been thrown into the sea long before the fall of Troy. But without Diomedes' fierce breakthroughs and strategic diversions, the war could have turned into an endless bloody siege with no hope of victory. To understand the depth of the gulf that separated them, it is worth looking at their legacy, at the shadows of their fathers who followed them relentlessly to the walls of Iliad. Diomedes was the son of Tydeus, and that name sounded like thunder to any Greek heralding a storm. Tydeus was one of the 7 against Thebes, a hero of terrifying, almost demonic strength and unbridled fury. His story was one of bloody exploits and equally bloody sins. In one of the myths, mortally wounded, he split his enemy's skull in his death throes and drank his brains, thereby forever depriving himself of the divine immortality that Athena had prepared for him. Diomedes carried this legacy with him. He was not just a warrior, he was the son of Tydeus, and every step he took at Troy was an attempt to surpass his father's glory, but at the same time to purify it of its primitive savagery. In the Iliad, there is a telling moment when Agamemnon, wanting to hurt Diomedes, compares him to his father, calling the son a worse warrior. Diomedes' response is striking in its maturity. He does not explode with anger, but silently endures the insult, only to prove himself right later, not with words, but with deeds. His entire Aristeia is a dialogue with his father's shadow. He is just as fierce, but his fury is controlled. He is just as close to Athena, but unlike his father, he does not commit an act that would make him unworthy of her favor. He surpasses Tydeus not in strength, but in wisdom and self-control. Ajax's legacy was different, brighter, but no less demanding. He was the son of Telamon, an Argonaut, friend of Heracles, and king of Salamis. He belonged to the Achaean family, like Achilles, and had blood that was close to the gods running through his veins. No one expected cunning or eloquence from him. He was expected to deliver what his family had always delivered, indomitable power. His strength was not the legacy of a sin to be atoned for, but the legacy of a glory to be confirmed. He was what he was meant to be, a rock against which enemies would break. He did not have Diomedes' inner conflict. His conflict was external, himself and the enemy army. This simplicity and integrity made him incredibly effective in battle, but vulnerable outside of it. He did not try to be someone else. He was the quintessence of himself, and therein lay his greatest strength and his fatal weakness. Let us take a closer look at his greatest feat, the defense of the Achaean ships. It was not a short episode. It was a long, exhausting battle, described in several songs of the Iliad. When Hector, inspired by Zeus, broke through the wall protecting the Greek camp and the Achaeans rushed in panic to their ships, it was Ajax who became the last line of defense. Homer describes him not running across the decks, but striding from ship to ship like a giant. In his hands he held not an ordinary spear, but a huge sea hook, a long, heavy pole used to push off from the bottom or from enemy ships. This weapon was clumsy, not intended for combat by a single warrior, but in Ajax's hands it became a deadly scythe. He single-handedly held an entire flank, preventing the Trojans from setting fire to the fleet. Anyone who tried to approach with a torch fell, pierced by this monstrous weapon. There are no divine miracles in this episode. Zeus is on the side of the Trojans. Poseidon only secretly encourages Ajax, but does not give him strength. This is a pure, distilled feat of human endurance. He was drenched in sweat, his shoulders and arms ached from the strain, he could hardly breathe, but he stood his ground. It was not a bright flash like Diomedes, but a long, painful burning that kept the last hope of the Achaeans alive. Diomedes' Aristeia, on closer inspection, reveals not only his fury, but also his remarkable discipline. A key episode that is often overlooked is his encounter with the Lycian warrior Glaucus. In the midst of his bloody frenzy, when it seemed that nothing could stop him, Diomedes encounters Glaucus. Before engaging in battle, he asks about his lineage, as was customary. It turns out that their grandfathers were sworn brothers, bound by the sacred bond of hospitality, xenia. Diomedes' grandfather, Aeneas, had once welcomed Glaucus's grandfather, Bellerophon, into his home. Upon hearing this, Diomedes immediately thrusts his spear into the ground. All his divine fury evaporates in an instant in the face of the unbreakable law of the ancestors. He tells Glaucus that there are many other Trojans he can kill, and many Achaeans for Glaucus, but they must not raise their weapons against each other. As a sign of confirmation of their words, they exchange armor right on the battlefield. This act, in the midst of a bloody massacre, is striking. It shows that Diomedes is not a mindless berserker. He is a warrior who honors the code of honor even when the goddess herself pushes him to kill. He is capable of stopping his hurricane-like impulse for the sake of a higher principle. Could Ajax have done the same? Certainly. But Ajax did not have such an internal conflict between rage and duty. His actions were always dictated by a simple and clear understanding of honor.
In Diomedes, we see a constant struggle and a conscious choice in favor of order and tradition. The symbolism of his battles with the gods is also deeper than it seems at first glance. By wounding Aphrodite, he attacks not just a goddess, but the very cause of the war. Aphrodite, who promised Paris the most beautiful woman, is the source of the entire conflict. Diomedes' blow is a symbolic blow to the recklessness and lust that brought hundreds of thousands of people to the walls of Troy. His duel with Eris is even more significant. In the Greek pantheon, Eris is the god of frenzied, blind, and chaotic slaughter. He revels in screams and blood, fighting first on one side, then on the other, causing only confusion. Athena, Diomedes' patroness, is the goddess of wise, strategic warfare waged to defend the polis and establish order. When Diomedes, guided by Athena, wounds Ares, it is not simply the audacity of a mortal. It is a symbolic victory of meaningful, tactical warfare over senseless slaughter. It is the victory of reason over chaos. Thus, Diomedes becomes not just a hero, but the bearer of a certain ideology, the representative of a new, more civilized type of warrior. Their interaction with Odysseus, the most intelligent of the Achaeans, also serves as a litmus test for their characters. Odysseus and Diomedes are the perfect team. Their joint nighttime sortie is a symphony of strength and intelligence. When it came time to choose a companion for this deadly venture, Odysseus chose Diomedes without hesitation, saying that with him the two of them could return alive even from the flames. He valued not only Diomedes' spear, but also his wit and composure. They understand each other with half a word. Diomedes, in turn, completely trusts Odysseus' cunning. This is a partnership of equals, where each strengthens the other. The relationship between Odysseus and Ajax is a story of rivalry and misunderstanding. They represent two polar opposites of heroism. Ajax is the heroism of the past, where everything is decided in open combat. Odysseus is the hero of the future, where victory is brought not only by strength, but also by words, cunning, and knowledge of the enemy's psychology. Their conflict over Achilles' armor is not just a dispute over inheritance, it is a clash of two eras. And Odysseus' victory, awarded to him on the basis of his greater contribution to the cause of victory, symbolizes a paradigm shift. The world ceased to be simple and understandable, and Ajax found himself a stranger in this new world. His tragedy is that he could not and did not want to adapt. His suicide is not simply an act of despair. In his dying monologue, brilliantly conveyed by Sophocles in the tragedy Ajax, he curses not so much Odysseus as the world order itself, in which cunning is valued above valor. He takes his own life because his code of honor does not allow him to live in a world he no longer understands or respects. If these two were destined to meet in combat without the intervention of gods or men, what would we see? It would be a mesmerizing spectacle. Ajax, slowly and inexorably advancing on his opponent, shielded by his towering shield, from behind which only the plume of his helmet and his flashing eyes are visible. Each step he takes pounds the ground. He will not rush. His tactic is to wear down, crush, and deprive his opponent of room to maneuver. His shield can withstand any blow from Diomedes' spear. His own spear, thrown by his hand, has tremendous penetrating power. Diomedes, on the other hand, would not stand still. He would circle Ajax like a wolf circles a bear, constantly changing direction, making feints, trying to find a gap in his defense. His advantage is speed, agility, and accuracy. He would not try to break through Ajax's shield head-on. He would aim for the unprotected legs, the gap in the helmet, the shoulder above the edge of the shield. He would use deceptive maneuvers, forcing the giant to turn around and lose his balance. The fight would turn into a contest of endurance and speed. Ajax would wait for a single mistake by Diomedes, a single misstep that would allow him to deliver a crushing blow or grab him with his mighty hands. Diomedes, on the other hand, would look for a single vulnerable spot where he could direct all his skill and fury. Most likely, like Ajax's duel with Hector, this fight would have ended in a draw at nightfall. Ajax was too well protected for Diomedes to inflict a quick wound, and Diomedes was too fast and clever to allow Ajax to trap him in the grip of his power. They would have parted ways with even greater respect for each other, because this hypothetical duel would have revealed the main truth. They were not enemies, and they were not just rivals. They were two sides of the same coin, two necessary conditions for victory. An army consisting only of Ajaxes would be indestructible, but slow and predictable. An army consisting only of Diomedes would be swift and deadly in attack, but vulnerable in defense, prone to adventurism. It was their combination, the unbreakable fortitude of one and the fierce intellect of the other, that made the Achaean army the force that even the walls of Troy, built by the gods themselves, could not withstand in the end. To better understand the difference between the heroes, it is worth paying attention to how Homer himself describes them, using constant epithets, verbal markers attached to the character's name. Ajax is almost always referred to as the stronghold of the Danaans, like a wall, the great Telemonid. These epithets emphasize his static nature, reliability, and physical scale. He is an object, a geographical feature of the battlefield, as constant as a hill or a river. He is not fast or cunning, he is mighty. His valor is measured in terms of mass and stability. Diomedes, on the other hand, is endowed with epithets of a completely different kind. Loud in battle, tamer of horses, and, at the height of his Aristeia, fierce. These definitions point to dynamics, action, sound, and energy. Loud in battle, boin agathos Diomedes, is not just a reference to a loud voice. It is a characteristic of a leader whose battle cry leads people, cutting through the noise of battle. He is a source of energy, the center of movement, while Ajax is the center of stability. Even their weapons are symbolic. Ajax's is primarily a shield, an object of defense. Diomedes is a spear, a weapon of swift attack, which he throws with divine accuracy. It is interesting to trace their interaction with Achilles, the paragon of a warrior. Ajax was his cousin and closest friend. When a delegation of Achaean leaders comes to Achilles' tent to persuade him to return to battle, it is Ajax who utters the last and most compelling words. After Odysseus has exhausted all his eloquence and old Phoenix all his tearful pleas, Ajax addresses not so much Achilles as Odysseus, but in such a way that the main character can hear him. He speaks with soldierly directness. "Let's get out of here. It's useless to talk to this man. He has nurtured a wild hatred in his heart because of one girl, and we offer him 7 and many more gifts. He has forgotten his friendship and comrades who honor him above all others." This speech, devoid of any cunning, hits the mark. It appeals not to profit, but to military brotherhood and shame. And although Achilles does not return to battle immediately, Ajax's words make a much greater impression on him than Odysseus's flowery persuasion. He understands Ajax because they speak the same language, the language of straightforward honor. Diomedes' relationship with Achilles was more distant, based on mutual respect between warriors, but without personal closeness. They were rivals for the title of best fighter. In the funeral games in honor of Patroclus, organized by Achilles, Diomedes proves himself to be a versatile athlete. He wins the chariot races and then enters into a duel in full armor against Ajax himself. This duel was stopped by Achilles, who feared that in the heat of battle, one of his best warriors might seriously injure the other.
But the very fact that Diomedes, not being a giant, fought Ajax on equal terms speaks to his exceptional skill as a fencer. It is important to note that in this duel, Diomedes acted aggressively, constantly attacking Ajax in the neck, above the edge of his shield, and it was his pressure that made the Achaeans fear for Telamon's life. This once again highlights their styles. Ajax withstood blows, while Diomedes delivered them. We can also consider their role in events that go beyond the scope of the Iliad, but are part of the general Trojan cycle of myths. For example, in the story of Philoctetes, an Achaean warrior abandoned on the island of Lemnos because of a foul-smelling wound from a snake bite. Philoctetes had the bow of Heracles, without which, according to a prophecy, Troy could not be taken. When the Achaeans needed to retrieve it, Odysseus and Diomedes went after it, in one version of the myth. Ajax was not suited for such a mission. It required not strength, but diplomacy, cunning, the ability to persuade, and, if necessary, deceive. Diomedes again appears here as the ideal partner for Odysseus, capable of both forceful capture and subtle play. Another aspect is their vulnerability. Ajax's vulnerability was psychological. His body was practically invulnerable, like Achilles. In some versions of the myth, not Homer's, he was protected by the skin of the Nemean lion, which Heracles threw over him, leaving only his armpit unprotected. But his spirit, his pride, proved fragile. He was broken not by a sword, but by broken. Diomedes's vulnerability was more subtle, but no less real. It lay in the very nature of his strength, divine protection. He was great as long as Athena was with him. Without her, he would have been only an excellent warrior, but not a god-fighter. His post-war fate is a bitter irony. Unlike Ajax, he returned home, but found no peace there. Aphrodite, unforgiving of the wound, inspired his wife Aegiala to be unfaithful. The great hero who had triumphed on the battlefield found himself betrayed in his own home. He became an exile, forced to seek a new homeland on the foreign shores of Italy. His survival was not a cloudless triumph. It was the beginning of a long journey full of losses, proving that even the favorites of the gods do not escape retribution.
Perhaps the most honest verdict was delivered by their enemies themselves. The Trojan seer Helenus, addressing Hector and Aeneas, utters striking words, placing Diomedes above all others. The most fierce of all the Tydides, the mighty leader of the Argives. We did not fear even Achilles himself, the leader of men, though he was born of an immortal goddess. But this man is terribly fierce, and there is no equal to him in strength. This testimony is invaluable. The Trojans, accustomed to the terror of Achilles' name, feared Diomedes even more on that day. Achilles' fury was human, albeit great. Diomedes' fury seemed supernatural to them because they felt the chilling breath of a deity behind him. They respected Ajax as an indestructible barrier, but they feared Diomedes as an inevitable punishment. Their leadership styles were an extension of their natures. Ajax led by example, being a living embodiment of steadfastness. His Salamis warriors, fighting shoulder to shoulder, formed a monolithic phalanx, reflecting the indestructibility of their leader. He did not need long speeches. His presence on the front line spoke louder than any words. Diomedes, on the other hand, was an inspirational leader. His battle cry and his swift breakthroughs ignited the hearts of his warriors, turning them into a single punishing force. This difference became even more apparent in the council of leaders. Ajax was silent, and only in extreme cases did he utter a few simple but weighty phrases full of soldierly honor. Diomedes, on the other hand, was a skilled orator, capable not only of contradicting Agamemnon, but also of proposing a balanced plan of action, as he did after the humiliating defeat, when he called on the Greeks to fight even if everyone else lost heart. Ultimately, their legacy was determined by their death or survival.
Ajax's demise was a profound moral trauma for the Achaeans. It was a loss not at the hands of the enemy, but from internal strife, a symbol that even the greatest power can be destroyed by resentment and envy. His death is a tragic ending, period. The story of Diomedes, even with his exile, is one of continuation. He did not simply survive. He became the founder of many cities in Italy, bringing the Greek heroic spirit to new lands. His legacy is not a frozen monument to valor, but a living process of civilization. One became a legend of how one can break down while remaining true to oneself. The other, a legend of how one can survive by adapting without losing one's essence. Both were great warriors, but they responded to different challenges of their time. Ajax was the ideal hero for one specific battle, while Diomedes was the ideal hero for the long and unpredictable war that is life. So who is stronger? The answer depends on what we mean by strength. If we are talking about pure physical power, endurance, and the ability to withstand any blow, then Ajax is undoubtedly in first place. He is the ideal defender, a living shield without which the Achaeans would have been doomed. But if strength is the ability to inflict maximum damage, turn the tide of battle, and accomplish the impossible, then Diomedes takes the lead. He is the perfect weapon of attack, whose divine fury crushed any obstacle. Ultimately, it is a choice between an indestructible shield and an all-piercing spear. And perhaps the true strength of the Achaean army lay precisely in the fact that they had both of these great warriors.